Welcome to a new episode of the Analytics Experience. Today we're here with Sangeeta Krishnan, Senior Analytical Lead at Bayer and also author of Thriving in the Data World. And I also have here Bruno Carrera.
How are you guys? It's a pleasure to have you here, Sangeeta.
Hi, it's nice to be there, meeting both of you and chatting.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we wanted to ask you, how is it that you got into data? Before we get into experience, before we get into education, your book, we want to know, how did everything start for you?
How you finish here?
Actually, I would say I have more of analytical thinking, I would say. And I even growing up, obviously math was something I liked. Statistics specifically is something I liked growing up. And overall, I started my career as a software engineer, and the passion for numbers and data and to relate that, data storytelling is something I really like about. Like, it's just not the numbers. There is a message, right, that has to be interpreted with that. So that analytical aspect kind of drove me towards it. And so I really enjoy working in data because of those things.
That's good. And I feel like that's very interesting because I feel like everyone that gets into the data science world, we always either come from a math background or we have some sort of interest or passion related, like, software development or, statistics that you were mentioning too. But it's really interesting that the transition of, software engineering, math, and statistics, and then data, I feel like that has a nice ring to it for sure.
Yeah, and I have a creative side too. So obviously, it kind of balances. Like, when it comes to work and those aspects, like professional aspect, I'm very analytical thinking, logical thinking person. But on a creative side, I like to paint, I like to crochet. So I'm kind of very balanced in both ways, I would say.
Absolutely. And we discussed this a couple of days ago, that it's great to see that there's so many people that exactly work in tech, or very quant, like when it comes to background. And then you see people who are also on the entrepreneurship side, right? They are developing their own projects. They're trying to help people in the community on their many ways, and also have this creativity and this creative background, which is very interesting to see.
Yeah.
I didn't know what first, and I think you're the perfect balance between that, because you're being an entrepreneur with your book, but also you keep the balance of working and dedicated of doing analytics. And that would be my first question: what is your daily responsibilities as a lead analyst in Bayer?
Definitely, I work a lot with business stakeholders and obviously delivering data products, efficient data products. That would be the primary core. I've been here for a very short period of time, but overall in my career, I would say working in delivering value-driven data products is one of my primary focus. If something is done manually, I'm not saying that we should automate everything. I'm not a big fan of it. But at the same time, the balance, whether I'm getting the value out of automating something and when should I automate? Can I make that process efficient? Can I solve that business problem? So those are the aspects I've done in my entire career, moving into data. So to bring that value, to see it from a different lens, something which was an opportunity that was missed out because we were not a very data-driven organization. And being a data-driven organization is not in just a word, right? It is a lot of hard work. The quality of data is in question as well. So those are the areas I focus to deliver something which is something people will use, not just delivering for the sake of it, but something which people will use. And driving that adoption is an area I focus as well, so that people not only are aware that this exists, there is some kind of a data literacy that has to be brought up so that people appreciate the value of it. Otherwise, you're giving something to people, oh yeah, it's well and good, it's something shiny, but I don't really see much value because I don't interpret the same way a technical person interprets it.
Exactly. And it's super interesting what you bring up, because we are always talking on this podcast about the importance of, as you're saying, on organizations, there's always data engineering to have the data stored onto data lakes, and then, it's transported through ETL. Then we get to analysts and data scientists who actually do the work of getting the analysis going and reporting to stakeholders. And then you actually you get to this, as you were saying, in your case, people who lead these data teams, who are the ones that actually have to report to stakeholders. And at the end of the day, they make decisions of yes, it looks shiny and it looks good, but does it actually bring value to us? Is it actually like helping us like be more efficient, bring money to the company? So it's really interesting that you mentioned that balance of having like, this is very interesting to do, and again, looks flashy and makes a lot of money for the company, also costs a lot of money for the company, but does it ultimately like bring value to it?
I think what Alfredo is saying that we always, we were also part of the business analytics club when we were in college. And we, all the people that were part of our club, we always mentioned like, you need to have the soft skills to be able to explain about data, to not only the technical part of it, of just, like doing all the analysis, also to communicate to people what you understand. And that will be my question. How was the process for you to communicate all this analysis to people that do not understand about data or predictive models, that they can understand what you're saying, that it will be better for the company?
Yeah, totally. Because I wrote a chapter about it in my book, like data storytelling, because I think we all would share some experience where we have sat in presentations which are very like filled with so much of information, numbers all over the place. At the end of the presentation, it was like so overwhelming. I don't know which side I should look and what I should follow. I think that kind of leads to the question, like, why is it like that? Because everybody ultimately wants to give a good presentation, so it's not intentional. So where the thing gets missed, in my opinion, is people are very knowledgeable. People who put such presentations, I wouldn't say they didn't understand what they were doing. They definitely may be very good in their job. But what happens is they only see from that lens, like of the technical lens, where they feel everybody wants to see all that detailed analysis. They don't ask the question, I'm presenting, but who am I presenting it for? If your audience wants to, if your audience is a set of developers also, yeah, it makes maybe perfect sense. But if your audience is not at the same level and they are more interested in a summary level information, it is the job of the person who is presenting to really scale it up or down based on who is going to be consumer of that information. And that doesn't efficiently happen because most people, when they have to present, they start with, okay, I've done all this analysis, let me just put together. It should be the opposite, like to say, who am I presenting for? Okay, what time do I have? Sometimes that's why it is so overwhelming, because in a half an hour presentation, I have to sit through looking at so much of content, which would have been like much easier because the focus also, right? Like if you look at a screen full of numbers, you don't really know what you should focus. So that is why color, font, all these things come into play of how you want to communicate. It's not just the visuals, it's what you're talking to. Sometimes people are just repeating like whatever they see there. So that is not very helpful as well, because that is there and then you should bring in the analysis part, which shouldn't be there on the screen. So those are the ways I would say is you can really be effective in your communication.
Completely agreed. And especially like, please keep developing that when it comes to your own like professional experience. But me and Bruno, we also discussed this recently, like on my professional experience, for example, I've always been really careful when it comes to technical side and trying to explain really well, because it's the part that I develop myself. So I understand that part. But when it comes to like communicating with C-level officers, that they are maybe going to take a look at the presentation, like the slide, maybe 1 minute, because as you said, maybe you have like 15 to 30 minutes. They will not care if you use a decision tree. They will not care if you use whatever predictive model or algorithm you've been using for the analysis, because at the end of the day, they want to be like, all right, what's the outcome of this? How can we express it so that other people can understand it and make decisions? And once we've done that, we can actually focus on how you guys did the work, because that's where the value comes in. The value doesn't come about the explanation of the design process or the development process, but more about the outcome, which, believe it or not, again, the only people who care about the technical development are the ones that do it, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, because that is natural, right? Because those are the people. I mean, if you start showing me a presentation where you're telling me, okay, this is the table I used and all, that level of information is just, okay, that's good, but do I need for this audience? Maybe not.
Sangeeta, I have a question. Alfredo and I in this podcast, like he was saying before, we always talk about the different positions that are in the industry. And in one of the chapters of your book, you talk about data ecosystem. You want to explain us a little bit more about what you want to mean with a data ecosystem for people that want to learn about data, like for beginners?
When I use the word ecosystem, I basically mean like, there are a lot of moving pieces, right? So it is like how in a biology, when you say ecosystem, we all like plants, animals, everything has to be together. It's a similar concept. Where it is not just like one can be without other. So if you focus all your effort into like building nice dashboards, everything, and at the other end, you don't have good governance, you don't have good data quality, none of these things matter, because that is why it's an ecosystem when it comes to like all the pieces bring some value. So it has to be in a balance for it to work. If your people, don't understand, it still won't work, because you can build the fanciest thing, nobody is going to use. And even if you bring the fanciest things and people understand, if the quality underlying is not good, it really is like people will lose the trust very fast, because like whatever it shows is not correct to begin with. And if all these things happen and there is no governance, who should get access, who should be seeing this and who should be editing this, still it's a problem. So that is why it's an ecosystem where all the moving parts carry some meaning, some value, and they have to be in sync with each other.
Completely agreed. And I think that brings a really good point, which is tying it back to what we were saying before. Like, the data engineering process has to be connected for like then the analyst to receive the information. That's when the analysis happen, and then we get to the stakeholders part. But it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because if there's no harmony and no communication between these teams, like it's happened to me before in projects that we had the whole data engineering team set on one, like, different activities and like milestones and what they had to do. And then you got to the analyst parts and they were like, all right, when are we getting this? Because we don't generally care about what the data engineers are doing, but it's vital for us to get the information and actually be able to do our job. So it's a really interesting point that you mentioned that.
Yeah, that's how I see ecosystem, because everything has to flow together. You cannot just leave out one, because sometimes some people ask like, is governance important, or I should focus more on data literacy? It's like, well, it both, but if you're going to pick, you have to kind of pick governance very critically too, because without governance, what is coming into your system, it is like all over the place, right? There is no trust to begin with, because I don't know, there is no governance. I just bring in any data from wherever I like. So,
and from all the different positions that you were in, the analyzing part of it, what's the position you enjoy your most in your analytics career so far? Like the one right now, the one that you'll be doing, what's the turning point of a data role that you were like, you know what, I want to continue be doing this? Like, what was the turning point that is like, yeah, I want to teach, I also want to always perform an analysis?
Because it's also worth mentioning, like, your career is like amazing. Because going through your profile on LinkedIn, it might sound very interesting, but like we saw, software engineering. We also saw, like, again, a lot of things really with data analysis. We also saw product management, which is really interesting because it's a transition of like getting people together and actually lead teams rather than like being on the front lines and like actually code and develop. So I think Bruno did a fantastic question. Like, what would you say was your turning point, and what would you say that is the thing that you enjoy the most out of all the positions that you hold in the last couple of years?
I am more of a person who continuously likes to learn and evolve. So obviously, after my master's, which obviously master's in computer science, I moved more into like software engineering, coding, web development was what I started my career as. And after a couple of years, I worked a lot with business stakeholders and everything in that company a couple of years ago. And obviously product management was something that interested me. And until recently, I have done like more of a full-time role when it comes to like work. And I wanted to give a try to IT consulting. So I did that too for like 3.5 years. So that kind of like overall for me, trying new things kind of interests me. But to answer the question why I moved into data, it's the same thing like many people, like people who like math, statistics. So they kind of feel the impact. And also in the recent years, we have been collecting a lot more data than ever that everybody will accept. So obviously when I started, web development was fun, but now it doesn't matter because many jobs are indirectly data jobs. Maybe you're not doing like a real Python coding or something like that, but still you're in some way or shape or form, you're either a consumer at least. Like even for becoming a consumer of data, you need to have some understanding, right? Which goes back to my topic of like data literacy, because I cannot push a product to someone and say, oh, now I have all these dashboards, now I have all these processes, go use it. If you don't have a basic understanding, at least you should have understanding of a user so that you can come back and say, whatever you show is not right. Because to question data, you have to still understand data, right? Otherwise, I can show you anything, you cannot question it. So for you to question, you have to still absorb that data in some form. So that is why I think with the amount of data around us, I think many professional choices are data related. Whatever we call them, we are using data in some form. And so that kind of is my interest as well. So it was a perfect transition for me to get into it.
That sounds super interesting. And as a matter of fact, with everything that you just mentioned, I think it's really interesting. Like with all the experiences that you've accumulated over the years, what was that turning point that you said, like, I want to go into actually like writing about data? Because we feel like it's a really broad topic. It's a topic that is not easy to explain, especially if the niche or the audience of your book specifically is the same with the podcast. It's at the same time people who are either getting into the field for the first time and have no background, no sort of like relatedness to it, or it's for people who might be like more on the stakeholder or senior level who are not necessarily on the background itself, but want to understand it so that they can apply it to their, their industry or their own position. Like, what would you say make that switch instead of you like say, you know what, I should start writing about it?
Actually, I would say that many writers are first-time writers. I'm a first-time author, obviously. So people do it like they are good readers too, for the most part. You can see, like, I have a lot of books, lots and lots of physical books. I like to read like physical copies of books rather than ebooks. So I am a big reader as well. So what made me to write was, in my career, obviously, I have mentored people, like people who are right out of school, trying their hands-on in a data visualization role or data engineer role. So I have mentored them. So all these so I had an idea of what are the struggles people have. So what I felt was it's not always the struggle is like the technical tool, because there's a lot of YouTube channels, there's a lot of online material, there are books, there are meetups, whatever. I mean, there are so many ways of learning. So, and people practice too. And so obviously people who want to have a career in that, if you give them some examples of Python, they start practicing their own and they figure out what to do, SQL Server, whatever that is. So what gap I felt was they kind of understand those, they can implement those, but at the same time, when you have to put them in an organization, there is some struggle, right? Because what you learn, not every use case will be done in a business world, right? I mean, there are so many use cases. I have to pick and choose. I don't have unlimited funds for me to work on every fancy project. There may be some for like innovation or, I mean, you want to get better at something, but that will not be the entire aspect of it. So when it comes to people really like having like winning in a contest for like coding or whatever, that is with a different mindset where you are trying to get into like, okay, let me code so that I can win. In an organization, it's not just about winning for yourself. It's us doing it together as a team. So it's not so much about, can I code the perfect code? It's more like, can I solve this problem together with everybody's input? So it's a very different mindset. So that is a gap I felt, and having mentored several people during my career, it was kind of, I felt like that is an area I want to focus for my book, like the both sets of audience you've mentioned, like who are either entering or people who are transitioning and or somebody who is more on the other side, who doesn't have a technical background or a technical degree or whatever, and they still oversee the overarching technical aspect of the organization. So those are the people who would benefit from the book.
Thanks so much for that. And it sounds super interesting because, again, if you go back to our first episode of this whole podcast, like our motto was like, whether you like it or not, doesn't depend on your position or your industry at all. In the next 5 years, we feel like people are going to have to go into data, not necessarily in the practical part, as you were mentioning, because not every single person is going to need to code per se. But I feel like organizations, as you were saying, are getting more data driven, even more than like 2 years ago since COVID. And I would say that more and more people are actually going to need to understand the concepts behind it, just to give their input. As you were saying, when trying to solve a problem, all right, maybe I don't need to generate a data pipeline to get code from point A to point B, but maybe I know what a data pipeline is, or an API might help me and my organization solve future problems. So I think that your point ties really well with what we're mentioning. Like, there's a need for people to get into data, whether they like it or not, because the digitalization and technology is moving so fast, and the transition is happening right now, that I feel like your book covers it perfectly. And again, for people who are trying to get into the industry or just get into the topic itself, I think it's perfect.
And also the coding is evolving too. The tools themselves are evolving. No code was not a thing, like if you think about it, several years ago. Now they want to push, or overall that's the direction industry is going. So even if you're not a very coding kind of a person, very tech savvy, there are so many tools you can still get a lot out of it, because no code ML was not a thing before. Now it is evolving and it's maturing. It's becoming better and better. It's becoming more efficient.
Sangeeta, I want to mention something. Like, you're the first woman that we interview in this podcast, and we're really glad that you were the first one. And also, I want to ask you, like, how is being a leader, being a woman in the tech industry? Sure. And also, what do you recommend to young women that want to get into analytics?
I would say it's nice sometimes to have a different perspective, right? So I enjoy being a woman in tech. Technology is something I chose as a career, even when I was studying. So for me, it was not a transition, because that computer science is what I studied. But what I would like to say is, like, keep learning is something very important, and pick the right kind of roles, because sometimes people get too comfortable in the roles, which is a personal choice. If that is what you want to do, it's perfectly fine. But normally, I'm kind of a person who feels like who should continuously evolve, continuously learn. If you're able to do that, I think it really doesn't matter being a woman in tech, because the opportunities are there for everyone. It's just how you pursue it, right? That is the aspect people have to focus on.
Thank you so much for that. And again, like, we feel humble that you got to come here, because again, you're the first one that we got to interview, and obviously your resume speaks for yourself. Like,
thank you so much for your kind words.
Absolutely. But yeah.
No, I fully agree with that. And I think you're one of the best examples between, like, sharing what you know and sharing your knowledge. Like, how do you view, for example, I think part of the mission of this podcast is that we try to be data friendly. That's a hashtag we always use. Sure. And everything that you said is data friendly. And your book is trying to be data friendly as well. And I think that's really good, because it's this misconception about how terrifying or hard this topic it is, because of all the math and all the coding involved that we always talk about. Sure. But I think in your book, and even in your words today, you put it in a way that everybody can understand, and we can awake the curiosity in people to understand that they need to understand more about data, and in a friendly way. Like, in
a friendly way, yeah. Because I am the same perspective. I'm a person with the same perspective. Data, and when I wrote my book, that is why my way of writing in the chapters would be like, it is easy to read. I didn't want to have like a very technology savvy person only can read. It is not written with that context. I wanted somebody to enjoy the reading experience as well. Sure. So that was my focus as a writer, so that my effort always was like, I read it myself a couple of times, obviously, as any writer has to. So I was like, oh, I'm liking it. So that was my thought process with it.
And I have a question. If you didn't went to the analytical path, what else do you want to become in life? Like what other major, what other role that have not to involve with technology? You know, like you have nothing to do with it. What else you think you see yourself doing?
When I was very young, super young, I had like, at least I was dreaming that I wanted to be an architect. Like I wanted to build buildings for some reason. And I don't know why, but maybe that is what I really liked. And I thought that is what I will become, because building really interested. Buildings with like different shapes, how they're put together somehow interested me. And that is what maybe I would have pursued if I didn't end up becoming what I became.
I know, but it makes a lot of sense. Like that creative process of how to structure. People that have always mentioned me, like, you know, the creative side of analyzing the data set. Like people doesn't give the credit sometimes to analysts because they do not understand the creative side of how to like perform the
analysis
approach the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, and that's a very interesting
the architecture. Me neither. But I think that's awesome. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that is what I wanted to become. So
absolutely. Okay, and I think with this, we'll set for the episode. Sangeeta, thank you again for coming. And for everyone listening, we'll be putting the link for Thriving into the Data World. Thank you so much again for attending, for being with us here, and see you soon.
And
yeah, also, thank you both.
Thank you, and thank you for being an inspiration in this industry.
Especially for young women.
And in a data-friendly way.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
See you soon.
See you soon.
Thank you.